Co-chairs, we are now live. We can begin the meeting.
Let me know. Yep. Perfect. Good morning and welcome. My name is Francis Anderson, and along with Jeffrey Schaefer, we are the co-chairs of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. The committee secretary has confirmed that we have quorum, so I'll call the meeting 8 of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee to order, and welcome to everyone. This meeting is being held using the city's WebEx technology, with members and staff connected by video conference or by calling in. Because we are meeting remotely, we ask for your patience with any delays and technical issues. We don't have any registered public speakers today. The public can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com//Toronto City Council Live. I would like to remind all staff and presenters to keep their mic muted with their video turned off unless they need to address the committee. This will make it easier for the co-chairs and those watching along on YouTube to observe members as they participate in the debates and vote on each item. Members, please keep your mic muted unless you wish to question staff or speak to an item, and ensure that your video is turned on. As part of each agenda item, we'll ask members to raise their hands or unmute their mic if they wish to question staff or speak. We'll then create a speakers list and we'll call on members when it's their turn to speak. When voting on an item or a motion, we ask that members ensure that they turn on their video and raise their hand to indicate their vote. Members, I want to remind you that although you are participating remotely, you must still submit your motions in writing to the committee secretary. The clerk staff are available by email at ecdc@toronto.ca to help with motion. To start off the meeting in the right way, we're now going to have the offering blessing by Selena Young, the Director of Indigenous Affairs Office.
Selena, I believe that's your cue if you'd like to do a blessing or open us in any way. Selena, you're on mute. We're not able to hear you.
Obviously, there's a problem with Selena's connection. So, in light of that, I'll do the opening for us. Jemnado Nokomis Mishamis, creator, grandfathers, grandmothers, Miigwech, thank you for this day. This is a beautiful day in the month of December. Everyone is so upset and worried about COVID. Please help to take our minds off it and help us to think of the gift we've been given, the present today, us being here in a virtual circle together, to put our minds together, to put our thoughts together, to put our hearts together, to work towards responding to issues that affect the community that we live in. Creator, we ask each of you to help us to think in a good way, to see in a good way, particularly to listen in a good way, and and more importantly, to speak with kindness, caring, and respect. Creator, we ask you to allow the grandmothers and the grandfathers of the four directions to sit with us today and guide our work and guide our discussions and guide our decisions. So for all these things, Creator, we say miigwech to miigwech. Impromptu, but that's how we work. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee acknowledges the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, many of whom were our grandmothers and our grandfathers, those who were here before us, who made this a welcoming place for all of us to live and work and raise our families. We ask that everyone who walks on Mother Earth in this territory, this traditional territory, that they walk kindly, softly, and with respect. We understand and acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now it's home to many diverse nations, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And we're grateful they looked after this land as best they could. Now it's our turn. And we all have to step up. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you have an interest, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let us know. Seeing and hearing none, we will continue. May I have a motion to confirm the minutes from our last committee meeting on October 16th? Angus Palmer. A second? Thank you, Brian. Brian Winters. I have a motion from Angus, seconded by Brian. If all members are on video, can you conduct a vote by raising your hand or by saying aye? I'll ask the clerk. Not everyone is on video. Difficult to take a hand motion. And I didn't hear those in favor.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Madam Chair, do you ask the clerk to do a recorded vote for this?
Yeah, we'll have to do a roll call vote.
Madam Chair, there's an advice here from AV and IT. If you can turn off your video and see if you can see all other members, because I think we have some issues with your audio coming in. If you can try turning off your video, and if you can see all the members on the screen.
I see only 5.
Okay, Madam Chair, I can.
I see 7.
Madam Chair, we can see 10 members on the screen right now.
All right, should we then call? Can I call for a vote?
Okay, Madam
Raise
Chair.
your hand. Vote. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. It's carried. Well, that was a tough process. The motion carries. We'll now proceed to consider the 6 items on the agenda. But before I do that, at its meeting on December the 9th, 2020, the striking committee, sounds like a bowling bunch, the striking committee, has recommended to City Council the reappointment of Councillor Michael Layton to the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee for a term starting January 1, 2021. So congratulations. Thank you for remaining with the rest of us, Michael. Thank you very much.
Oh.
And thank Council for us.
Well, Miigwech to the 2 co-chairs, committee members. This is indeed one of my greatest honors serving on City Council, is working with all of you. So I do appreciate your friendship and support very much, and I'm very pleased to be reappointed.
Glad to have you back. You're buying coffee next time. That we're all together. Okay, the first item is item 8.1. It's a review of the meeting processes and the simplified rules of procedure. This item was deferred from October the 16th, 2020 meeting. And I understand that Sylvia Bezdecki, Administrator, Committees and Boards, City Clerk's Office, will give us a presentation. Take it away, Sylvia.
Okay, thank you, Co-Chair. So I'm going to share my screen, and I will speak as clearly as I can through the cloth of my mask. So good morning, everyone. Ahead of the last meeting, because this is an item that was deferred from the last meeting, the co-chairs had asked me to provide just a brief refresher about our meeting rules to clarify some of our meeting procedures. Meeting after meeting, members are asked to adopt items, amend them, receive them, and while this all makes perfect sense to folks who spend a lot of time excuse me, at City Hall, we recognize that some of these procedures aren't self-evident, and the last thing we want is for the simplified rules themselves to become complicated or any sort of a barrier to participation in the meeting. So using a standard meeting agenda, I propose just to walk through some of the types of decisions that your advisory committee members, or that you make as advisory committee members, and how this fits in with the simplified rules. And I will also touch on the topic of public presentations to committee. So very briefly, the simplified rules of procedure for advisory bodies are just that. They are a simplified version of City Council's procedures, stripped of the provisions that are unlikely to apply to one of your meetings. So the current set of rules that we have were adopted by City Council early in the term, and these would have been introduced to you at your very first meeting, and they are linked to that very first meeting on the website. They are one tool to guide the committee in its deliberations, and another tool is your terms of reference, which were also adopted by City Council and are also available with that first meeting of the term. While the rules of procedure apply to all advisory bodies, so the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, as well as the Music Advisory Committee, the Film, Television, and Digital Media Board, all of those advisory bodies use the same set of simplified rules. The terms of reference are unique to each body. And the simplified rules acknowledge that each of these bodies may have some of its own needs, and allows that if there is a discrepancy between the rules and the terms of reference, the terms of reference prevail. And you've already exercised this. Your committee, with council approval, amended its terms of reference to change the requirements around the frequency of meetings and quorum, and these revised provisions are currently in effect. So the committee secretary, or in our case, Jonathan Cancella, prepares, publishes, and distributes an agenda for each meeting. With appropriate notice to allow members to review the agenda. The simplified rules provide for this and also establish how an item can be added to an agenda. And you're by now likely familiar with the timelines. The secretary receives all items 10 business days before the meeting and publishes the agenda 5 days before the meeting, giving all of you approximately a week to review the materials. The agenda is a live document, meaning that once it's published, any revisions that are made to it are updated in real time. And you've by now spent a little bit of time looking at city agendas, namely those for your advisory committee. And these may look a little bit different from agendas you've used for other bodies or organizations that you may belong to. It might be helpful to look at how the individual agenda items come together, because this can also help you navigate the city system in looking up some of these items. So each agenda item has a unique identifier. Each item's identifier is a combination of the committee code, so in our case, that's AA, the meeting number, and the agenda item number. So in the example on the screen, this is the 5th item on the agenda of the 7th meeting of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. Next to that item is the considered type, which is mostly an administrative handle, something that the system requires us to input, but it gives a clue as to what the committee might then do with the item. The most common consider types that you will see are action, which indicates that there might be a recommendation for the committee to adopt or some action for the committee to take. Often you will see presentation there, in the case of a staff presentation that you might be asked to receive. Many items are relevant to the city as a whole, and you will see that in the upper right-hand corner where it says Ward All. In the case of items that are ward-specific and pertain to something happening at a specific address, that will indicate a ward number. And just at the bottom of the slide here, who can add items to an agenda? So any one of you as members of the advisory committee, city council, a council committee, a local board, or a city official. Other fields on the agenda you see are the summary field, which is a description of what the item is about, and the background information, which includes all the documents that have been submitted on the item and links to all the public documents. Occasionally, the advisory committee might receive correspondence. If members of the public submit emails or letters, these will be listed as communications, and they would be listed but only posted publicly if they came from an organization. We don't publicly post correspondence from individuals unless expressly requested to do so. And these fields don't change. So you'll see the summary and the background information. You'll see that in the agenda. You'll see these fields again in the minutes. And that's because our agendas and minutes are generated from a system, and you see the front end of that system when you log on to the city's website and you see that schedule of meetings. It's that same system that we use to create the documents. Okay, so there's a process for dealing with each item, and on each item, the co-chairs identify the item, they introduce it for the committee. Next, we move on to a staff presentation if there is one. Sometimes this presentation might be from an outside organization or from a community representative if invited to speak by city staff. So again, the items have to be placed on the agenda by someone from that list of individuals authorized to do so. Your committee may also request a presentation from an organization or from an outside party or from a city official. Such requests would need to be made by way of the appropriate standing committee. Next, we would have public speakers. So individuals and organizations may register to speak on any item on the committee's agenda. Under the rules, they have 5 minutes to address the committee, followed by a round of questions. Some engaged citizens speak many times to items on various agendas throughout the course of a council term. And while not all of these bullets might apply to each item, the first and the last bullet has to happen. So the co-chairs have to bring an item forward, which also means that any debate that takes place does have to be on an item on the agenda. And then members do have to vote, because every item has to be dealt with in some way. So the committee must make a decision on every item, and through these decisions, your committee fulfills its role as a council advisory body. So it makes recommendations to city officials on matters within their jurisdiction, it makes recommendations to council committees, or it makes recommendations to City Council on matters that might be on the council agenda. So again, every item must be dealt with in some way, regardless of whether it is a report or a presentation, whether or not it has recommendations, and whether or not the committee agrees with what is being proposed. So the decisions are made by voting on a proposal contained in a motion. And by motion, the committee may choose to receive the item for information, and that simply means to acknowledge the matter and take no further action. At the end of this presentation, you will have the option of receiving the item. But even if an item comes to you with recommendations that you choose not to act on, by receiving that item, you are simply acknowledging that you as a committee have in some way dealt with the item. You may choose to defer the item to a future meeting, which was the case with the item before you right now. You may choose to adopt the recommendations, or you may amend or add new recommendations. So motions to amend tend to be substantive. They contain additional proposition or they change language in the existing motion. So whenever possible, we would request to have those in advance, and City Clerk's office staff will help draft those, and with your permission, might seek input from program staff if necessary, for these proposals must fall within the scope of the committee's mandate. Ideally, they should be, well, we'll help you prepare them, and then they would be typed, we would display them on the screen, and these might be read aloud, and just all steps taken so that it is clear to everyone what is being put forward and what the committee is going to vote on. So again, City Clerk's office staff will assist members with the motions, and motions do not, under the rules, need to be seconded. All members present must vote, unless prevented by law, such as in the case of a conflict of interest. Majority vote is required to pass a motion. A motion fails if the motion is tied. And as we have been doing, members may vote by a show of hands or may ask to have the vote recorded in the minutes. The minutes are prepared without note and comment. They include motions, votes, decisions, and attendance. And these are published a few days after the meeting. We try to have them up within 48 hours after the conclusion of a meeting. All the information is posted online to the city's website at www.toronto.ca/council, and you may subscribe to e-updates to receive notifications about agendas and minutes. And Jonathan Cancella is your contact for this committee, so for any information about the advisory body, about adding items to agendas, about how to proceed with items, or any other information you may wish about the city clerk side of things, that is who you may contact for future information. Any of us are happy to assist in any way. So I will stop there and I will ask if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Olivia. I'm obviously having a problem.
Do any members have any questions of the staff? Angus?
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question. The note about all members present having to vote unless prevented by law, are you saying that it's not possible to abstain, that you have to vote in favor or opposed, or do you just register your abstention? Is that counted as a vote?
So there are no we don't record abstentions. So in most cases, if a member has filed a conflict under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, the Declaration of Interest, they would, in most cases, absent themselves. So if it's in council, the members would leave the floor of council, or they would leave the room for the vote.
Sorry, I wasn't clear. What I'm saying is, or what I'm asking is, if a recommendation is made and there's a motion that's been made and a vote is held, people can vote in favor, people can vote in opposition to it. What I'm asking is whether people can simply abstain, not because they have a conflict of interest, but because they genuinely don't have a position to take on it or can't decide which position has merit.
No, under our rules, there's no provision for abstentions.
Thank you.
If I may just interject, we'll call it on a point of order. How councillors would typically treat that if they don't wish to be recorded in the positive or the negative of the item, they would leave the room. What makes it really easy when you're having meetings online is you can leave the room quite easily. I would say, I would just add though that if enough people choose that option, the meeting itself may lose quorum on a vote, and that would be problematic because at that point, and the clerk can correct me, the meeting is over, I think.
I mean,
Go ahead, Angus.
sorry, I would just say that I accept that those are the rules, although those are rules that it seems to me that if you had eight people present and 5 of them abstained, or 7 of them abstained, and 1 person voted in favor, the person who moved the motion, presumably, that would tell anybody thinking about it that there really wasn't support for something, that it needed to be discussed more thoroughly. And so I accept that that's the rule, but it just doesn't seem like a very sensible rule. it seems to me that people ought to be able to simply not take a position on something because they think that the option that's on the table doesn't have enough merit to support, but doesn't have enough problems with it to publicly oppose. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Mr. Palmer, so the simplified rules derive from the council procedures, but those themselves are taken largely from the City of Toronto Act. So the legislation under which the city operates doesn't allow the city to have a rule for abstention.
Andrea?
Thank you, Scully, and good morning, everybody. I'm just sitting here, and you need to know that what we do is we invite other persons within our community to also to view the proceedings. And one of the comments, which is very true, is that if this is an Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, shouldn't we really be developing our own rules? And so are we just really like a make-believe committee? I think my recommendation is for us to go back, and I wouldn't want to turn off my camera, because if I didn't want to make a decision, I would think that it's really critical that if we are going to, if there's issues that we need to deal with and we're not prepared to finish that we park it, we sleep on it, or that. But I think that there needs to be some more thoughts about how we conduct our affairs as an Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. And so I'd like to recommend that we go back again. If someone decides you want to abstain, then that's up to us to determine what does that mean to us, or are we going to park it? So I'm not prepared to accept the City of Toronto's bureaucratic process. I think it's really important. Otherwise, then we should just become a committee. Don't call us an advisory group. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. Ruth?
Thank you for the presentation. Good morning, friends. I want to echo exactly what Andrea was saying. I was feeling that, Andrea, so thank you for articulating that. For me, as Haudenosaunee, we have there is actually in our governance structures the idea of sleep on it. Right? That idea is to give us the time to reflect and to not make a decision just because that's how the agenda works. That we would have to sometimes abstain until we fully understood. And I feel like if I don't fully understand or feel that I have all the information, I need to abstain. It is actually something that I feel is very important to who I am. And I agree that we cannot be the adherence to a strict Western concept of governance does not allow us to actually advise as we should holistically. So thank you, Andrea, for saying that.
Thank you, Ruth. Are there any other members wanting to jump in?
Chair? Chair, this is Sylvia. So
Yes, Sylvia.
So on the concept, on the notion of just taking some time away from an item, there is the option of deferring an item, because to a future meeting, if members collectively felt that they needed more time to consider the proposition. So that is currently in the toolkit, and we can certainly. What I can undertake to do is take the question of abstentions and speak to some staff and legal about that, and get back to the committee.
Are there any other comments or questions? Andrea?
I think we're repeating the very same thing. And Ruth, thank you for your comment. But as Haudenosaunee, that the that when we say we're it's the same as parking it. We don't abstain. What we do is we take those decisions and we make sure that it's not something that'll separate us, but rather that we park it under our pillow and to have it just to sleep on it. But I think it's really critical that if we're going to do something, that we need to develop something to bring back that's acceptable for us as a committee that falls within our laws, our own laws of who we are as Ongohowe and Anishinaabe and other friends of this committee. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. Are there any other comments or questions? Thank you, Sylvia, for your presentation. It seems that it's opened up another question that we have to settle. We have to finalize what we do in the case of someone who is not voting yes or no, who's abstaining. I still see it, even if you turn off your vote, that's still someone in the room, whether you like to acknowledge it or not, which would still keep our quorum going. It's just they're not voting on it. I realize that that's not the general rule at City Hall, but this, Sylvia, I wonder if you could look into it and find out if this could be our rule. We are a unique Indigenous group who have our own governance, our own way of dealing with matters, and see if we can marry that into the system that is here at City Hall. So you'll have to take that back and take a look at it and see how you can massage City Hall to fit our way of doing business. Please.
Yes, Chair, I will take that back. I will speak with the colleagues in the Indigenous Affairs Office and the Legal Department, and we will come back with answer or topic for further discussion for the committee.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. I appreciate that. Are there any further speakers to this? Then I will entertain a motion to receive this as information.
So move.
Angus, you got a fast finger there. Thank you very much. All those in favor, wave at me. Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. The next item is item AA8.2, proactive response to support Indigenous children, youth, and families in crisis. It's an update. I understand that the invitation of the Indigenous Affairs, Tiffany Malley will provide a presentation to the committee. Ms. Malley, are you ready?
Good morning, everyone. I am ready.
Okay, it's yours. Take it
Great.
away.
Good morning. Ani, my spirit name is Woman Who Is As Beautiful as the Fire. I am Makwa Clan. My home is Treaty 13. Good morning, advisory members. Miigwech for the opportunity to virtually meet before you on this beautiful morning that Creator has given us. I am a long-standing community member and Ashkabewis for many years. I declare I have a disability. This is my second time speaking virtually in front of you. I want to first start off by giving my deepest apologies for my last presentation. I prepared a lengthy presentation to share with you. It was difficult to condense a 1-hour presentation on the spot. My apologies again. It is with great sadness and great urgency that I'm here to speak with you today. Within the last 7 days, my 12-year-old Indigenous daughter was abducted, assaulted, and was very close to being the next murdered and missing Indigenous girl statistic. I come to you today with a deeper understanding and urgency to create a solution-focused approach to address the concerns of the Toronto Indigenous community. I would like to communicate that a call out to the aunties and the grandmothers for guidance has been made. SEMA has been offered and received. The aunties and grandmothers have laid the SEMA. Ceremony was conducted. Spirit gave a clear message and direction of what needs to be done. I am very pleased and I'm very honored to present to the Aboriginal Affairs Committee that the implementation and creation of the first Toronto community-run Indigenous Family Advocacy Center has been created. The matriarchal Indigenous Family Advocacy Center's main objective is to create a rapid response approach to meet the immediate needs of the Indigenous community. The matriarchal Indigenous Family Advocacy Center will empower, educate, and consult with all Indigenous community members and agencies to identify the ongoing current needs and gaps that are not being met by the current systems that we currently have in place. We will address these gaps. The Matriarchal Indigenous Family Advocacy Center is committed to supporting all community members navigate various areas of systems, which include human trafficking, crisis response, health, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, children and adult mental health, two-spirited issues, housing, homelessness, child welfare, and legal systems. The Matriarchal Indigenous Family Advocacy Center is committed to creating a rapid response support system referral service that works. The Matriarchal Indigenous Family Advocacy Center will continue to advocate to the systems and ensure all community members receive a responsive approach to access the appropriate services they need, which will foster their plan of care to healing and wellness. The Matriarchal Advocacy Center will continue to empower community members to effectively navigate the systems that are currently in place. There is currently 6 vacant seats on the Aboriginal Advisory Committee, on the Advisory Council. I would like to ask the committee to consider these 6 seats be allocated to community members with lived experience. There is a wealth of knowledge people with lived experiences have, which is very valuable to the committee. I would like to recommend that a community-led advisory committee be created. The purpose of the advisory committee is to oversee the task, the Aboriginal Affairs Committee, and the Indigenous Affairs Office. The advisory committee will work to establish true transparency, accountability, and to ensure that the Toronto Indigenous community is being consulted, informed, and communicated about the current decisions that are being made. Nothing about us without us. I would also like to make a recommendation, one more, that the opportunity for community members are available, because as everyone knows, it's very difficult to be informed about the processes that are going on. It's very challenging to find the minutes, council meeting information, and I feel it would be helpful to have a more clear system that would help us so that more people can attend these meetings and more people can be aware of the decisions that are being made. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I look forward to creating a positive change for all of us to work together in a great way. I say miigwech for your time, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malley. Members, do you have questions of the presenter on this item? If so, please raise your hand. Are there any other speakers to this item? Hearing there are no speakers, do I have a motion to receive the item? Ruth? Thank you. I have a motion from Ruth to receive the item. All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much, Ms. Malley, for your presentation. The next item is item AA 8.3, Indigenous Placemaking Initiative. I understand that Jennifer Franks, consultant from the Indigenous Affairs Office, will give a presentation to the committee. Ms. Franks, are you ready?
I am ready. Clerk's going to
take it away.
Thank you. I'm just waiting for my presentation to appear on the screen.
Now's your time to ad lib.
Fortunately, I don't have a lot of good jokes. I don't have any, really.
We will display the presentation, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thanks very much. Tanse and good morning, members of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. My name is Jennifer Franks. I work in the Indigenous Affairs Office here at the city. My primary role in the office is to advance the Indigenous placemaking work in the city. And I'm here this morning to give you an overview of some of the work that we've been undertaking and some of our thinking around future work. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So it's important that we ensure we have a shared understanding of what we mean by placemaking. So some of the thoughts on what Indigenous placemaking is about from the perspective of the work that's happening at the city is, it's intended to improve the visibility of Indigenous people, history, and the vibrant culture in Toronto, decolonizing and indigenizing public spaces, including parks, and exploring ways to better share space and better tell the truth of the land, water, and Indigenous people here in Toronto now. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that this work has had broad support from council, from City Council, and the support's been consistently stated and restated in a variety of motions and reports and policies. So to highlight a few, as you all know, in 2015, Council endorsed all the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and these calls included specific calls for engagement on recreation, art, cultural protection, and the commemoration of victims and survivors of residential schools through memorials. So since that time, through staff planning and discussion, work has been underway to find a coherent and intentional and appropriate way to engage Indigenous communities in placemaking. And this work was punctuated by direction from Parks and Environment Committee in 2017 to create a framework. At the same time, Teo Core from City Planning was engaging broadly with Indigenous communities, and their final recommendations on that strategy included specific language about Indigenous placemaking and engagement. Next slide. So when we talk about placemaking in the context of this initiative here at the city, we're also talking about all of the policy levers that we have at our disposal to define and redefine public spaces. And so what's listed here on the screen is obviously not the full list, but they're just some examples of some of the existing strategies and levers that we can use to advance Indigenous placemaking and support it. So many of them fall under the city planning division, so official plan, also PFR, the Toronto Ravine Strategy, the Toronto Biodiversity Strategy, and the TO Core. Next slide, please. So in order to guide that work and informed by consultation with Indigenous communities, we've articulated 4 goals to clarify what we mean when we talk about Indigenous placemaking framework. So those goals include expanding and ensuring presentation and commemoration of Indigenous history and culture, creating space, both physically and in process and policy, for ceremony, teaching, and community, strengthening Indigenous connections to land and water, both traditional and contemporarily used, and building capacity for land-based Indigenous engagement and greater cultural competency for City of Toronto staff. Next slide. So those goals have been distilled into 4 focus areas. So public art, places and naming, policy and capacity, and engagement and consultation. Next slide. So first of all, art, as we know, art is a focus that can provide both short-term and long-term impact. So some examples of placemaking in public art, as we know, are murals, temporary installations, so installations that aren't intended to be in one fixed place permanently, and also permanent installations that honor significance of place. So there's a variety of ways that art is advanced through the Indigenous placemaking strategy. These include leveraging existing programs like Nuit Blanche, Luminato, the street art program, and also the city's year of public art. I believe there was a presentation from a colleague from Economic Development and Culture who gave a presentation at an earlier meeting about the Year of Public Art. And there will be specific Indigenous actions, strategies that are going to be developed as part of that Year of Public Art. Indigenous art also, and advancing Indigenous artists, is an overall theme of the Year of Indigenous Year of Public Art. So it's not a specific own category necessarily, but it's something that will be infused in all aspects of that strategy. And also working with city divisions and city agencies to incorporate Indigenous art and engage with Indigenous artists in their projects. So for example, with Creatio, there's the new Etobicoke Civic Center, which is currently in the design phase. An Indigenous public art consultant has been engaged to explore Indigenous placemaking and art within that development. Next slide. So places and naming. So as we all know, advancing access to land and water for Indigenous community is really essential for our healing and community well-being. And our office is working with Indigenous community and both internally with city divisions and agencies to work to provide safe access to land-based programming that will have positive impact on the physical, spiritual, and mental well-being of community members. So some examples of this include the Spirit Garden at Nathan Phillips Square, which, as we know, is led by Toronto Council Fire, working with groups such as the Humber River Collective, and also exploring opportunities on land surrounding the Toronto Zoo. And I also just wanted to mention that the Spirit Garden, I don't want to just bury it in a slide. It is probably, I would say, the most significant current Indigenous placemaking initiative that's happening at the city right now. And it really incorporates and imbues all aspects of placemaking. So it's a huge project. It's going to be extremely significant, not just for our communities, but for the broader Toronto, broader public. So I just wanted to make a specific mention of that amazing project. Next slide. So with naming, so we have at the city a naming policy, and it outlines sort of like the process for naming and renaming properties, but where it lacks is it doesn't really lend itself to a systemic kind of look at a broader commitment to representation in naming in Toronto. So as we know, Indigenous names can work to address erasure of Indigenous people on this territory. So there's a number of initiatives going on and that have already taken place to work to address that erasure. And there is increasing support for Indigenous naming, which is great. And there's definitely need for space for a more coordinated approach. So as we know, naming can be either reactive or proactive. So an example of a reactive naming process is the current review of the Dundas Street renaming, and that's something that city staff are currently engaged in looking at. And that could be, depending on the direction of council, a catalyst for a larger review of all the city assets and honorifics, and looking at who we choose to honor and how. 6 Points configuration in Etobicoke, 2 of the 3 streets as part of that project have been given Indigenous names. Etananawaskana Park in Don Mills area, which was formerly called Woodsey Park. There was some work with the Wendat to identify a proper name for that park that honors the history of the people that lived there. And then Wisconsin Parklands in the Lower Don. So there's a number of naming and renaming, and that will be something that we'll continue to see. Next slide, please. Policy and capacity. So, our public realm is not only shaped by physical space, but it's also shaped by the policies and the management and the animation of those spaces. And through that is, city policies. That's often how it comes through. So we need to build capacity for placemaking and create policies that enabled Indigenous engagement with the public. So some examples of this, as many of you already know on the committee, we talk about sacred fires and ceremony. There's work currently underway with respect to sacred fires, and Deputy Fire Chief Larry Coco will be speaking later in the meeting about a report to council. Also, decolonizing policy and legal instruments, and growing and harvesting medicines in parks, and working internally with city colleagues to enhance capacity and understand Indigenous worldviews and Indigenous approaches to working together. Going back to the sacred fires, I just wanted to also mention that this work is ongoing, and we'll continue to have conversations and expand the dialogue with more community. There was a survey that was circulated pretty extensively in October and November, seeking feedback from community on sacred fires. And the intention is that feedback will help inform further conversations, and we will come back to this committee with further updates on that and an analysis and sort of a compiling of the results of what we heard in that survey. Next slide. So engagement and consultation. We all know that there's a need for more consistent and authentic and meaningful engagement with Indigenous communities. And that's been quite clear with our conversations within communities. So some examples of how we are working to improve our engagement is we're establishing an Indigenous placemaking advisory circle. We currently have an interim circle in place to help to provide advice on the terms of reference for the circle, but also a selection process for actual members of the circle. Engaging with existing tables like this committee and also task. Engaging with diverse voices in the Indigenous community, and undertaking and promoting meaningful Indigenous engagement internally with city colleagues and city agencies. Next slide, please. The final slide. So further work. So as I mentioned, we are working to undertake a process to select members of an Indigenous placemaking advisory circle. This circle would be comprised of Indigenous designers, artists, knowledge keepers, historians, land stewards, and youth, and to advise and guide on this work. We also would like to, this is on my wish list, is to undertake a digital mapping exercise of all the Indigenous placemaking activities occurring throughout the city, because it's a very visual sort of spatial process, and in order to kind of have a full understanding of that, it'd be helpful to have a visual of all of the amazing work and activities and projects that are happening, and that will help better coordinate initiatives, and create stories, leverage partnerships, and coordinate better internally within the city as well. And then through that, the creation of an Indigenous-led proactive and comprehensive placemaking strategy. So these are all sort of stepping stones that we hope will lead up to a comprehensive and more forward-thinking and thoughtful placemaking strategy in the city. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'll take questions. Anyone has questions?
Thank you, Ms. Franks. I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into that presentation. It looks very interesting. It looks like there's lots we can put our thoughts into and have input. Members, do you have any questions on this item? Angus?
Thank you. It's really interesting to hear about and to learn more about. I was struck by your slide on art, and you talked about working with city divisions and agencies to incorporate Indigenous art, and you mentioned the ECC, but you passed over Housing Now, which is on your slide, and I was wondering if you could speak to, I mean, of course, in the best of all worlds, we wouldn't just have Indigenous art on the Housing Now sites, we'd have Indigenous housing, but we'll put that off to the side. I was wondering if you could speak to how Indigenous art is being incorporated at any of the Housing Now sites.
Sure. Actually, it's a very timely question because we had the first Indigenous sharing circle last night. Some members of the committee were there with Create TO and the Two Row Architects and Bob Goulet, the Indigenous consultant, on that project at 1631 Queen Street, which is at Queen and Coxwell. And so this is really in a very initial kind of exploratory stage. So that project, for example, is in the design stage. So Two Row has been engaged to explore Indigenous placemaking opportunities. So that is not just art, but there's an opportunity to engage Indigenous artists to run proposals for either art outside the building or in integrating artworks within the building in common areas, for example, but also other placemaking. So we were talking about, space for sacred fire, space for Indigenous medicines, space for Indigenous families to come together and tell stories and share food. So that's one example that I'm most familiar with Housing Now. But I do know in general that Create TO, in my conversations with people from that agency, have been they're very interested in engaging more broadly with Indigenous community on integrating Indigenous placemaking, which could include art, but other aspects of placemaking into their projects. And yes, the suggestion that housing or actual spaces within that development large enough to accommodate Indigenous families, it was also made last night. So we're that's definitely yes.
So I don't actually recognize 1631 as being a Housing Now site, I don't think it is actually, but it may be another site. But I don't know if Councillor Layton's on the call and could speak about it. What can you tell us about 1631 Queen Street?
I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't know much about 1631 Queen Street.
Angus, I can send some information about it to you if you want to know more information about that project.
That'd be great. I don't recognize it as a what's it called? Toronto build Toronto build or whatever they're called. I don't recognize it as one of their sites or a Housing Now site at all. So I'm definitely interested. Thank you.
Sure. Will do.
Any other questions? Jeffrey?
I think Brian had his hand up too. I'll speak after all committee members have had a chance, if that's okay, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you. Brian?
Nakamik, Jeff. And thank you, Jennifer, for the presentation. It's always nice to see you and hear from you. Regarding the city's placemaking initiative, does the city not consider it to be a barrier to engaging the public to exclusively work with the WebEx platform? As I think can be pretty well identified by this meeting specifically, which has featured a digitized, accelerated version of Francis Sanderson's voice, as well as a total miss in terms of the opening that was supposed to be provided by Selena Young of the Indigenous Affairs Office. Considering these are all people with stable internet service and technology, I don't see how the average community member can be expected to be involved in this consultative process, let alone our precariously housed or homeless community members. I also recently attended a city event that was supposed to include a hulikkleiding ceremony by one of my elders, whose entire presentation in Inuktitut was digitally scrambled, and which she was then asked to paraphrase in English. I see this as being exclusive and exclusionary to our community members, and I'm just wondering if there might be a better way that we can do this.
So really good question, Brian, thank you. And I appreciate the frustration with WebEx. So unfortunately, that's not something that I have any control over, but I do appreciate the frustration with that. And so, you know, not just with placemaking, but with all of our work, all of us know that engaging with our communities in person is so much more meaningful, and you know, it just the face-to-face and the physical presence of being together is so much more effective and powerful. And unfortunately, you know, we have limited ability to run in-person meetings or conversations because of COVID, but we have, where possible, gone out and sat in circle on the land with community to have this conversation. So it's, you know, but obviously we have to follow COVID protocols and you know, limit the physical numbers of people. But we are looking at any way we can, depending on the circumstance, to actually go out and physically meet in circle. And I know that from the technological side of things, I mean, you know, from the city end, we're limited with WebEx in terms of when we organize meetings, as you know. But you know, we're trying in any way we can. And, you know, we had a survey with Sacred Fire, which is not a great way of engaging. I get that surveys are, you know, pretty transactional. But, you know, all of the tools and levers that we have at our disposal right now, we're trying to use. And as I said, where possible, meeting in person in a small groups.
Nakamik.
Any other members wishing to comment? Seeing none, I'll go to Jeffrey.
Beautiful. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in response to Brian's last comment too, we have found at Native Child and Family Services, and I'm sure other member agencies have, that Zoom is a very friendly platform. I know that the city is committed to WebEx and that is not likely to change, but there may be a scenario where the city could work with a task member agency that does use Zoom to conduct some of those consultations on behalf of the city. That might create a pathway for other community members to be able to participate, and I just wanted to suggest that. And Jennifer, but you know, my original comment, first off, thank you for the presentation. We've had some conversations, you know, placemaking is close to my heart. Though you mentioned it slightly in the presentation, I didn't see a very firm or well-articulated focus on the connection between land and Indigenous place and placemaking and wellness for the Indigenous community. And I really want to emphasize this because this is an area where Western science is beginning to catch up with what elders have known for millennia, and that is that connection to land is very important for wellness. And I do think that it's particularly important for Indigenous folk that are living in urban centers like Toronto. When I think about the partnership that we had with the City of Toronto to do our land-based practice in parks, we did do a rapid evaluation in collaboration with Sick Kids. And, there was about 55 families there in the rapid evaluation. 96% of those families, through engagement on the land with our staff, saw a reduction in mental health, a reduction in anxiety, an increase in wellness and family connectedness and cultural connection. We know that getting people out on the land in ways that reflect their culture and that support a sense of cultural belonging is good for wellness in very evidence-based ways, right? When I think about the fact that, yes, people are poking needles in arms, we've got the vaccine here, that's great. There's going to be a secondary pandemic of mental health challenges, poverty, substance abuse issues, family violence. Many of those challenges can be mediated through connection to land. We know this, right? We know that mental health challenges can be mediated through connections to land. And when I think about the disproportionate impact that this pandemic is having on Indigenous people, I think it is absolutely critical that we define spaces in the City of Toronto that are green, that we can utilize as agencies to support families, to get them outside, to check how they're doing, to provide them with resources, to connect them to culture and language and ceremony. And I just felt it very important to emphasize that, because I do think it's a direction that we need to move in together. Miigwech.
Can I respond to that from a procedural perspective, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sure.
It's just ironic when we're talking about the governance of the committee, and I just want to make sure I'm following the rules as a presenter. So thank you for mentioning that, Jeffrey. I do realize that I really skimmed over that incredibly important aspect of placemaking in my presentation. I could probably give a very long presentation just on that issue on its own, and I think we will be coming back to this committee with more on that. And I think so. A big part of what I've been working on, just even myself in the last little while, has been, we have a number of, so there's Native Child, and we worked with Aboriginal Legal Services in the summer as well to facilitate access to green space for their family dispute resolution program. But then even in a less sort of formal sense, there are, as you know, groups that are currently gathering on the land in Humber, other parts of the city. They're running ceremony, they're having sacred fires, they're doing land-based teachings, we are working to kind of try to facilitate their use of that space in a way that's safe, and safe for them culturally, but also safe for them in a physical sense in terms of, fire safety and all that kind of thing. So that's becoming a really big something that's becoming very, we're getting a lot of requests, and we're getting a lot of, interest in that. And we're trying to work with community on that. And we see that as being, the city needs to take a more holistic, comprehensive approach to these types of requests and to these types of community gathering on the land, that we need it's part of the decolonizing the city's, policies and practices and some of the bylaws. And that's a priority, I think, in our office, is working internally to kind of, look at where, what are hard and fast rules that have, safety concerns and, that can't really be bent, but also where can we be more flexible? Because access to land and water and being on the land and gathering is definitely something we all know is extremely important for our community's health and well-being. And I thank you for raising that.
No, it's my pleasure. I just, as I look out my window and as I feel the seasons changing in my body, I have to say that I'm concerned about families and children and youth that are self-isolating. We've got a cold COVID winter ahead of us, vaccines aside. People need a space to go outside that's safe, that's under cover, that provides an opportunity for service staff to be able to provide, culturally relevant service interventions in a good way. And I would really hope that all of the organizations that you mentioned would be able to work with the city to do that in a very, very quick way. I understand city process. I had the pleasure of working for the city for a time, and I certainly respect, the avenues of decision making that need to occur. But I'm also very concerned. I'm concerned about community right now. I'm concerned about the winter, and I feel it very important for us to pull together and create spaces for us to do this quickly. Yeah, Miigwech.
Thank you. I just have one small comment to make, and that's concerning the statement of commitment to the Aboriginal communities of Toronto that was developed in 2015. One of those commitments that the city has made is that the city also commits to working with the Aboriginal community to improve public awareness of Aboriginal life in Toronto. So all of these ideas, suggestions that come from the community should be taken in and thought about quite deeply. I look at things like the light poles, the banners that could be flown off those light poles in communities, in areas, particularly where you're talking about new street names.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly during June, Indigenous month here in the city of Toronto, that there has to be more highlighting done. I also think that new developments should all have this in their back pocket when they're bringing their developments to the city, that there should be some kind of an Indigenous flair to the design, to the input, that any development that's going up needs to have that as part and parcel of the plan. There are many things in that statement of commitment to the Aboriginal communities of Toronto. It's not just a document that was developed in 2015. It's a document that lives day to day with the city. Another part of that document says that the city will find ways of responding to Indigenous values when it comes to working governmentally. And so when we were speaking earlier in this meeting about abstentions and such, the city has already made a commitment to work with us to look at those. So I think that document has to be brought out, dusted off, and reread. There. Comment from Andrea.
Don't go, Francis. I just want to. I'm going to build on the young lady who was doing a presentation. But before I get into that, it's not a one-stop fit all. It's not like pantyhose, eh? And so what happens? We're looking at. To me, I'm thinking about our TARP 2. Doing that research for the community to find out. Not everybody wants to be on the land. A lot of them are in encampments. They want a house. They want a home. So I think in terms of the TARP 2 that we could look at, there are a number of people who aunties and the individuals who are offering some supports. I think we need to do some recruitment to look at what we feel what you and I want may not be what our community may want. And I know when we're talking about the safety, if you look at the area of downtown Toronto and as you see coming on Dundas closer to our area, the light poles are less. There's less, so then it's darker, and we need to look at the safety and the well-being of persons who are walking there. And we also have to look at ways and means of persons talk about being houseless. And I think that's really critical too as well. How do we engage and provide? Not everybody can, because of their credit, for whatever reason, that there are no housing stock that's available. So how do we come together and to find out we can work to look at a place that, you know, that meets our needs, a place that that can speak to, you know, those families, a place that can accommodate whether it's 5 or 6 individuals, a place that offers an investment, so they in turn become a community that wants to invest as well to make things, you know, better. But it's not a one-stop, you know, a shop. And I think we need to be really clear on that. On the land, there are a number of initiatives that we're on there all the time. You know, we're on there underneath the cement is still the land, right? And I think it's really critical that when we do our Thanksgiving each morning, we're giving acknowledgement for the mother that we're allowed to participate on, and it's more than just sitting in a park. It's about finding out who is out there for our family. I know that we've come across putting a number of individuals who have not been associated with any of our services, and it's really excellent to become engaged with them and to see how do we meet their needs. But they certainly don't fit the bill that a number of, because we're pigeonholing individuals right now. And I think it's really timely, but thank you for that, Francis. I think it's really timely for us to start recruiting members within our community, help us to find out what their, you know, the true needs are. So we can all fit into this one size fit all pantyhose. Yeah.
One size does not fit all. Are there any other comments? Seeing or hearing none, I would ask for a motion to accept the presentation. Andrea, thank you. We'll take a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, Jennifer. It's a big job ahead of you, making every building in the city Indigenous. Thank you. At this point in the meeting, I'm going to relinquish my virtual gavel to the co-chair, Jeff Schiffer.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you.
Take it away.
Okay.
Thank you.
This brings us to our next item, which is AA 8.4, proposed amendments to the Toronto Municipal Code surrounding open air burning. I understand that Larry Coco, Deputy Fire Chief, Community Risk Reduction, Toronto Fire Services, and Division Chief James Stoops, Toronto Fire Services, will give a presentation to the committee. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, chairs, committee members, Councillor Layton. It's a real honor to be here today to have this discussion. I want to just briefly discuss Chapter 441 and Chapter 442 of the Municipal Code in regards to the bylaw of open air burning. So as mentioned in my opening, I'm the Deputy Fire Chief of Community Risk Reduction, and the work area of this service area is to reduce the probability and consequence of fire for the citizens of Toronto. We are responsible for ensuring the Ontario Fire Code is complied with, and the Fire Protection and Prevention Act. So if we could kindly move to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So just today I'll be outlining how TFS, or Toronto Fire Services, got to this proposed amendment to the Municipal Code, and this will include the work completed to arrive here today and what we're proposing and its impact. So if we could kindly advance to the next slide. So under the Ontario Fire Code, open air burning is considered any fire that is conducted outside of a building. It is not permitted in the City of Toronto except under certain conditions. A permit has been issued by the Toronto Fire Service or Parks and Recreation. That's under the Fire Code, as the Chief Fire Official can authorize a permit. The fire is used for the purposes of cooking food, and the fire is of the size and nature that it's realistic to the amount of food that's being cooked. Or open air burnings occurring by an approved appliance. That would be something that that's certified by the Technical Standards and Safety Act, which is basically could be an outdoor propane fueled fire pit. Those are permitted because they don't produce any smoke. So in order for the to comply with the current provincial legislation, Toronto Fire Services has created an approval process. So we don't intend on restricting the activity totally, but instead we want to ensure compliance with the code and that the open air burning can occur safely. So to put it in context, we don't historically have ever issued open air burning permits for single family homes. The densification of Toronto, our homes are tightly knit together, and there's a hazard associated with open air burning with embers that create another fire and the enjoyment of your own property. Could you imagine having a large open air fire pit in the back with a bunch of smoke emanating into an open window? It would cause a lot of disturbance to the neighboring homes. So when we do issue permits, there's an application process. And we want to understand who's going to be responsible for the fire, how long it'll be occurring, and a site plan. We have an inspector attend to ensure that there's no visible dangers to the public or nearby structures. And we speak to the person responsible for the fire and the precaution that's going to be taken. Currently, the fee is approximately $260, and that's what's charged to the applicant. And that covers the application process and the site inspection. On average, Toronto Fire does not receive a lot of these applications. Annually receive about 80 applications for this process. And there's a number of reasons groups may apply for the permit, including film production, who they want to use a fire for a scene, or companies looking to use the fire for training for fire extinguishers, or for even for festivals. The approval process currently in place allows Toronto Fire Service to know when and where a controlled fire will be occurring. As the largest city in Canada, Toronto, as I mentioned, is a highly densified urban environment, and the embers from an open fire can be a hazard to the surrounding community. And there's always a concern that drifting embers on the wind can be carried to adjacent properties and create other fires. So that's the background. So let's move to the next slide and we can talk about the approach. So in the third quarter of 2020, Toronto Fire Services staff began a review of the approval process after feedback about the process was received from the Indigenous community. We looked closely at our process and identified that in 2019, we only received 77 applications, and approximately 15% of these applications were for sacred fires. We also looked at other applications, and there was other cultural religious groups that requested an approval as well. With a greater understanding of the users of the approval process, we recognized there was an opportunity to amend the process and respect the constitutionally protected rights of Indigenous peoples to practice ceremony and recognize the community benefit of these practices. It's within the current authority of council to remove the user fee associated with the provincially required approval process for any request for sacred fires. So we engaged with the Indigenous community in a series of roundtable discussions, and thankfully facilitated by members of the Indigenous Affairs Office. A big thank you to Selena and Jennifer for being very pivotal and allowing us to gather a wholesome understanding of the significance of what these sacred fires are for the community and the impact they have. So we wanted to look for a path to improve the process, and during these conversations, it was identified there are other related conversations that were necessary, and such this proposal presented today represents an immediate step that we could take while ongoing conversations are occurring with the office and Indigenous peoples living in Toronto. Next slide, please. So through the review, TFS has identified 2 steps that can be taken to remove barriers to Indigenous peoples and cultural and religious groups in accessing this process. TFS is proposing that a second service category associated with open air burning be created for Indigenous peoples and cultural religious groups who would like to have an open air burn. This second category would remove the fees associated with it and would be classified as a service that provides a community benefit under the corporate user fee policy, which is the mechanism TFS uses to determine fees for services. We recognize the importance of removing the fee for Indigenous peoples applying for an approval as the first step in addressing the barriers Indigenous peoples have faced with respect to conducting sacred fires. It's an opportunity to work with the community members in a good way to ensure that TFS is actively contributing to advancing the city's commitment to truth and reconciliation. The financial impact of this change will be minimal for TFS and absorbed in the budget. TFS is currently engaged in drafting a staff report to make the necessary changes. Next slide, please. Toronto Fire Service is drafting a staff report with a proposed timeline of March 2021 for committee and council to get the recommended amendments adopted. Once adopted by City Council, TFS will be able to formalize the changes in our internal processes, including an amended form specifically for cultural fire authorizations. From there, all applicants who identify that their applications are for the purposes of an Indigenous or sacred fire, that there will be no fee associated with it. We can move to the next slide, please. I would now like to open the floor to any questions or feedback with the committee members regarding these proposed changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Mr. Coco and Mr. Stoops. Members, I'd like to now ask if you have questions for staff on this item. Please raise your hand. Angus.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. So I imagine that there will be occasions where people want to have a series of sacred fires. For instance, you might decide to hold one once a month over the summer or throughout other seasons. And I'm wondering whether the intention and the practice is to have people apply for every single fire, or will there be an opportunity, do you expect, for groups to apply for a series rather than having to apply individually?
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. That's a great question. We have in the past issued a permit for organizations allowing the burns to occur over the course of a year. I'll give you an example. If there was a designated fire location that was approved and the protocols were in place and it was in a safe location, and the group said that they wanted to conduct these burns or the sacred fires over the course of monthly for over a year, we'd have no concerns issuing the permit for that 1 year duration. The intent would be that annually the permit would be renewed, and we would look at the conditions to make sure nothing has changed. But that we have the capacity for that. Thank you for the question.
And just a quick follow-up, and thank you for the answer. And that would apply also to groups that were not Indigenous. That is to say that if there was a series of fires to be held in a space that was deemed to be appropriate over a fixed period of time, they wouldn't have to apply separately. You could do an inspection. They could apply once for a period of time and pay one fee. Is that correct?
Technically, that's correct. There's some parameters. So, if, for example, if it was a location that was holding a bunch of festivals and the festival changed every time, we would have to assess the incident based on the facts that are occurring at that specific time. So that may not fall within a blanket approval. But if it's the same theme and the same event and the same style of sacred fire, we would have no concerns. If there was an organized group that was consistently leading it and there was the same organizers, we would look at it from that lens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angus. Are there any other speakers on the item? Ruth.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to make sure it does not have to be a predetermined schedule of burns. It can be like this 1-year permit that you and Angus were just discussing. That can be an open-ended, like you have rights to burn throughout, and or is it something that needs to be predetermined?
Because thank you for the question. That's a great question. Because we're in a very densified community, like the urban densification, the process requires a little bit of notification of when the fires occur, because you can imagine that when the public or anyone sees the smoke or a fire, they may mistake it as an actual fire emergency, and we take those seriously and we will dispatch our resources. However, if we know that there is a approved ceremonial burn, that's registered in our CAD. So our crews will be aware this is an approved ceremonial burn, and we will probably dispatch someone in the odd chance that maybe this fire has now spread, it's gone out of its fire location, and we want to protect the community. But being given the notice assists us in our assessment of any potential emergency. It's very important for us because we will receive, in some instances, not one, not two, but multiple calls for concern from the public, and it gives us situational awareness. It's a great question. Thank you for asking it.
Thank you, Ruth. Any other speakers on the item? Brian?
Thank you for the presentation. And I had this question a little earlier, and I think based on your 2 most recent responses, I think it's been answered. But I just want to clarify that this is something that specifically organizations can apply for, not individual community members, correct?
Correct. The intent is organizations and community members that are planning on doing a fire. And I recognize that the process of a sacred fire could involve many people, can involve one individual. I think if we're of the opinion that as the processes come in, if it's identified for a sacred fire purpose, our intent would be, assuming that the location's safe and the process goes through, we would issue the permit. Even my understanding, and I apologize, my understanding that a sacred fire could be for an individual alone if they choose. So we don't want to have parameters to say that's only has to be a group of people. If it's recognized and falls under the classification of a sacred fire, it would fall under that process.
Nakumik.
Francis, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much for the information and for taking our requests to heart and coming back with a very positive response. Will the Toronto Fire Service issue criteria that's necessary for people to have a fire, a sacred fire, so that there has to be certain things in place so that it's safe? You don't want people just putting together their wood and setting it on fire. I'm sure there must be some safety issues involved if you're going to have a fire, whether you have an extinguisher or water or whatever. Will you be able to develop a protocol for people who are requesting so that they can meet all the safety standards that you set out?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. As part of our process, when we review permits, there's a criteria we review, and one of the commitments we're going to make as this matter moves forward is if this gets finalized, we would like to put together an information package specifically for sacred fires. I think sacred fires are very unique in comparison just to a regular open air burn. there's a lot of significance and meaning around it. So one of our intentions is to get a further and fulsome understanding of the process and not arbitrarily make the rules. I would like to work closely with the Indigenous Affairs Office and understand the significance in the process and what occurs, and that will inform how we can provide some safety recommendations. I'm not, and none of my staff are subject matter experts on the significance of what these fires mean for the community. So I really want to come to you and I want to come to the community and understand what does this mean, and then we can work from there and come up with a set of parameters to ensure everyone's safety. I've heard feedback, for example, that a sacred fire should never be extinguished. Again, I'm not sure if that's correct. Again, I'm not the expert. So that's an important thing for us to assess. Okay, well, how could we deal with that? Does it mean it shall be supervised? It should never be left. It should always be supervised at all times. Once we get that feedback, we can set the parameters and work in consultation to make sure everyone is safe, but at the same time, the process is respected. Does that help, Madam Chair?
Helps a whole lot. The only part that I have a question is when you started my answer and you said, if this is passed, it should be when this is passed. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, Madam Chair. I have to respect the process and the will of council. So, but yes, I'm very hopeful that this will be passed. I think this is an important initiative for us to continue. We're committed to doing this work with the Indigenous Affairs Office and the community, and further these conversations. It's very important work.
Thank you, Francis. Yeah. Do we have any other speakers on this item? I'll just ask one more time. Yes, Tracy. Welcome.
Hi there. I have a question with regards to the application process. I haven't seen the application myself. Just wanted to know, is it a straightforward application? Will there be some modifications based on the information you get from Aboriginal community members? And how long does it take for an application like this to be approved? The reason why I ask is that if there is, for instance, a family in mourning and they want to have a sacred fire for their family member and they want to do this prior to the funeral service, would they have difficulty in getting this approval done in a more expedient fashion, because some of our members, might prefer to have that sacred fire for their loved one in the city because they've made Toronto their home for the past 20, 30 years, rather than in their home reserve community. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Another great question. Normally, at the long end of the scale, the process is rather quick. The application is just a one page. It stems on the inspector going to do an assessment. As we move forward with this, our plans are to develop a separate application process for sacred fires. It's going to be the same one page, but to recognize the unique circumstances. At the end of the scale of approval, the longest I've seen is a week. And we may want to consider adding an urgency on the application process for something like what you'd mentioned, a funeral. Barring commitments from other requirements in the city, I don't foresee it taking any longer than a couple of days if there's exigent circumstances, but in normal applications, approximately a week on the maximum end of the scale. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you for raising that. I mean, it's certainly an issue for us as well. When someone passes in the community that our organization has a close relationship with, it's not uncommon for us to want to do a sacred fire almost immediately. So I do think that attention to that is important and appreciated. So thank you, Tracy. Do we have any, I'll ask again, because this seems to be a topic of interest. Do we have any further speakers on this item today? Okay. Hearing no further speakers.
Jeff, I just wanted to say to Larry, Larry, I want to thank the fire department. It's Larry Frost at the Native Canadian Center in Toronto. We've had a fire, for many, many years. We're going like 30 years. And just in the last couple of years, we had to get a permit because, as you said, some of the neighbors complain about the smoke because we do have fires on for 4 days, 4 nights. That's our tradition when a person passes away. So the fire department did come and check and had told us what we need, like a fire extinguisher sitting by the fire and a firekeeper. So yeah, so I'm going to just echo what everybody else says, but we were surprised that we were charged in the last 2 years for a fire permit, and that was all due to a couple of neighbors complaining about the smoke. So I want to say we're moving forward, and I want to thank you and your team. Miigwech.
Thank you, sir.
Before we move, just have a question I wanted to ask. My hand was up, but I don't know if anybody saw it.
I couldn't see it, no.
So my question is, so at the beginning you talked about that there might be an individual that might be present just to make sure that you know a fire might not get out of hand or things like that. And so I'm just wondering, you know, like sometimes these can be one of the most difficult times that an individual is going through, and you know they're trying to make do. And then at the same time, if there's an individual there that they don't necessarily know that they, so I guess my question is, to what extent would the individuals, so if they're going to be present, because I guess that's my question, the first question is there going to be somebody present? And then if there is going to be somebody present during a sacred fire, to what extent have they had some cultural awareness training, some understanding of what's happening, and some ability to interact with Indigenous peoples in ways that are respectful, you know, particularly in those moments. So that's kind of the question that I had, whether there would be somebody present, and then the extent to which they've I guess engaged in some kind of cultural safety training or something along those lines.
So thank you. That's a great question. So just to clarify, we won't be present during the fire. So the approval process involves the application, and then we assess the location, the time and date, and where it's going to occur, and then the permit's issued, and we know the time. But we don't attend the fire, again, unless with the caveat that there is a 911 call for a fire and a concern, and we will dispatch our crews accordingly. We don't make the assumption that, well, that's okay, we're not going to send crews. We base it on the assumption that there is something happening and we have to come and attend, but there is no intention for staff to be present during the ceremonial fire, that a sacred fire. That's not what we will do. So hopefully that clarifies your answer.
Okay, yes, I just think I misunderstood that, but I just wanted to make sure if that was my understanding, that there would be somebody there who would be you know, able to deal in that situation. So that was just my question.
Thank you. Great question.
Thank you very much, Gina. Appreciate it. Okay. Last chance for further speakers on this item. Councillor Layton.
And I'll just be very brief. This is not intended as an offensive comment against Toronto Fire, but Toronto Fire is typically in the business of saying no. That they're saying yes to this, and I think have been embraced some of the feedback that they've heard from the Indigenous Affairs Office, and as well as others they consulted along the way, is I think very positive. And I would like to just commend the Deputy Chief and Toronto Fire for taking the approach of how do we get to yes.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. I appreciate the kind words.
Thank you for that. Yeah, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to echo those comments. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay.
My pleasure.
Okay, well then, hearing no further speakers on the item, could I please have a motion to receive the item? Angus, seconded by Tracy. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Oh, wait, I turned off my video. I don't know how that happened. Sorry, guys. Thank you very much. Technology.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, that brings us on to item AA 8.5, Indigenous Community Safety and Mental Health Responses in Toronto Update. I understand that Selena Young, Director of the Indigenous Affairs Office, and Anania Grant, the Director of Community Resources in Social Development, Finance and Administration, will provide a presentation to the committee. Welcome to you both.
Merci. Hello. Bon matin. Apologies. I'll start by apologizing for my connectivity issues earlier. Hopefully you can hear me okay now. Huge gratitude and an Eskimo Francis for stepping in and saying the prayer. I'm certain you did a much better job at setting us up in a good way than I could have. So I'm grateful for that and for you. So Clerks has the presentation up. Wonderful, thank you. We could go to slide 2. At a high level, here is really what we hope to cover with you today. Where did this originate? We'll give you an initial snapshot of where the city is at. We're really here to give a brief overview and some initial ideas on where to go next to identify funding needs for Indigenous-led responses to community safety and well-being. And we know that this is not exhaustive in the least. This is really the start for us in the city. And we want to continue the conversations, continue the important work, and find ways to support. And to be honest, where support is not needed or wanted, the city decide and lets community do what is needed. Can we go to slide 3, please? So you may recall the motion that you put forward, that the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee put forward in October, and that was adopted by Council in late November. Slide 4, please. So when I reflected on the direction from the committee that was endorsed by Council, I realized we needed to pull together multiple divisions because there's initiatives happening across various city divisions. And so we also heard recently during a roundtable with the Toronto Aboriginal Support Services Council with TASC and the Mayor that there is a need for dedicated funding for a coordinated approach to Indigenous mental health. And we also know that land-based programming and services are critical to supporting mental health needs. We talked a bit about that earlier in this meeting. So we're going to share, Anania and I are here, and we have some colleagues in the wings. Should there be questions later? We're going to share a bit of information about from some of the key divisions who are working in this space. And Anania is going to start because Social Development Finance Administration, SDFA, division that Anania is in, is doing quite a bit of work, has work underway as well as on the horizon. So I'll pass it over to Anania.
Oh, thank you so much, Selena. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. Sometimes this WebEx thing, I heard somebody talking about it earlier. Sometimes it's not great, but we're doing the best that we can with it. Thank you so much, Selena, for including me in the presentation to this amazing committee. I remember when we were putting the Confronting Anti-Black Racism plan together, we spoke with a number of your elders to help us in creating what is now called the PAC, the Partnership and Accountability Circle for the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. So I give much thanks and high respect to the role of this advisory committee in the city. My intention really is to share with you what we're doing in Social Development Finance and Administration Division, some of the initiatives and actions that make sure that we prioritize Toronto's Indigenous community. And this includes mental health supports. I will speak to specifically to the mental health supports that are on the way, that we're doing, that we will be doing as we move forward. So early in the pandemic, the city developed, and some of you may already know this, developed and implemented a mental health support strategy, which engaged a circle of community agencies to give direct on-the-ground supports to those who are most vulnerable to the negative impacts of this pandemic. This included, of course, the Indigenous community, to be done by Indigenous peoples. We were able to engage the Indigenous Affairs Office at the city for advice, as well as Native Child and Family. I see Jeff as co-chair, as an active partner to provide virtual mental health counseling and referrals to holistic supports. that we continue to go to these experts, these folks, to advise us as we move forward with this plan. So this started in early April and is continuing, and we are continuing to strengthen the resources as best as we can to ensure that there is capacity to support the community. We have been working with, and I said that wrong, I'm just going to say the acronym NAGB, for Indigenous Youth Mental Health and Wellness. And so that's from a Indigenous youth perspective, that's where the support has been going, and they have been providing us with advice. In 2020, many of you may be familiar with the city's community funding unit in social development, finance, and administration. So in 2020, we dedicated a total of 2.1 million to support social development efforts in the Indigenous communities. This, of course, included mental health work. In Q1 2021, I want you to pay attention to this because we will be bringing recommendations to committee for the CSP grant. So we're doing the CSP, meaning Community Services Partnership. We're doing a renewal, and we are bringing recommendation to committee to include an Indigenous specific stream within the CSP program, so that it's not Indigenous agencies and committees and organizations don't have to be part of the larger pool, but that there be a specific pool for Indigenous communities and grant, and that will be designed and implemented in the way that Indigenous community tells us to. This will enable also a stronger Indigenous honoring mental health support, and it will also enable ongoing support to the community. On the community safety and well-being front, we have a unit that is a tremendously dynamic unit that supports crisis in particular within the city. And in this community safety and well-being unit, we are ensuring that learning and understanding happens within and outside of the city in terms of Indigenous specific work. How do we respond specifically to the Indigenous community? And so working with the AIO, the Indigenous Affairs Office, we are reviewing the program design and approach to crisis response and to community well-being. And looking at decolonizing practices to community crisis response and crisis funding. In January, we're starting training to frontline staff to enhance trauma-informed and culturally appropriate crisis response and intervention approaches to Indigenous community. We are also doing a mental health pilot with Inagbe regarding Indigenous youth support, so that we're making sure that we are not only financially supporting, but in whatever resource we need to give, so that there is holistic wellness within crisis response and risk mitigation approaches to community safety and well-being programs. So we're doing the best that we can, and we will continue to seek advice to ensure that our programs within the city, our programs within SDFA, are aligned with how the Indigenous community wants us and prefers, and what is our best approach, so we can debunk a lot of the colonized ways that we may have been doing the work, and to make sure we are serving with excellence, because excellence will mean that we're being culturally responsive and culturally honoring. With regards to the policing reform, I know that my colleague Moshe Ray was here last month and spoke and also got your advice on moving forward. So I will just mention a few things that you may have already heard before, so forgive me if I am repeating. But going forward in January with this specific work, we're working very, very closely, of course, with the Indigenous Affairs Office to move forward on community partnership to support missing and murdered Indigenous women and girl engagement for community safety and well-being. We're working again with the Indigenous Office in partnership to forward community partnership to support overall safety and well-being engagement and to ensure that we have an Indigenous-led feedback in the community safety and well-being plan that Scott McLean is working on. Where we will be reporting back on the policing reform in January, as you probably know. And so we're looking at the results of the research and into community, and it is a hope, and I'm sure more plans to do that, is to keep you informed and continue to get support from and advice from. And lastly, I just want to mention briefly that a few weeks ago, the mayor announced the TO supports COVID-19 Equity Action Plan, which enables a targeted city response to COVID-19 hotspot neighborhoods that are experiencing significantly higher rates of COVID transmissions, lower testing rates, and higher positivity rates for the virus compared to other neighborhoods in Toronto. The overall plan is providing supports to neighborhoods and populations, including culturally responsive mental health supports. Through the TO supports our COVID Equity Action Plan, as in all activities, Indigenous communities has been prioritized. Note that anything that we do must come from Indigenous community, and if it is for you, it must be by you. And so last week, Selena, myself, Denise Andre Campbell, who is the Executive Director for Social Development and Finance, met with the leading members at Task to share with you that about this plan and to know that there is a specific stream for Indigenous communities, and we want to hear from you as to how you want to move forward with that, which also includes financial investments. So I'm expecting that we will hear within this week, certainly, from Task as to how we want to move forward so that we can continue our support. This is all I want to share for now, and I'm open to any questions or comments. Thank you so much again. Make wish.
Thank you, Ms. Young and Ms. Grant. Members, do you have questions for staff on this item? If so, please raise your hand or unmute yourself and let me know.
Jeffrey, there's a few more slides to get through if we wanted to do that first.
Sorry, I jumped the gun. All right, let's continue, please.
So if we can go, I think it's slide 6. Thank you, clerks. Please bear with me as the next few slides are sharing info from colleagues. Toronto Public Health, just to give you a sense of, the next few slides are to give you a sense of some of the other mental health related work happening at the city. So when it comes to Toronto Public Health, of course, we have the commitments have been made under as part of the Indigenous Health Strategy. Some examples include improvement in access to mental health and addiction services, creation of community gardens, investigating the development of a harmonized community-based healing and counseling team, as well as apprentices and community supports, and mental health and addiction services for the Indigenous communities are aligned and supported by a network of culturally secure care and trauma-based care providers, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. On cultural safety training, these training programs aim to enhance the capacity of Toronto Public Health staff on how to work respectfully, with Indigenous communities. And the thinking here is that respectful service with Indigenous peoples reduces the risk of re-traumatizing clients. TPH has partnered with Indigenous-led community organizations to expand culturally safe parenting support programs, with the thinking being that early childhood development is a social determinant of health, and that includes mental health. And on culturally appropriate health promotion, through a community-led and culturally safe process, TPH has partnered with Indigenous communities to develop the Toronto Indigenous Overdose Strategy. I know many of you were involved in that. Also, the Toronto Urban Health Fund worked in partnership with Indigenous communities to establish and launch a new Indigenous funding stream, which provides access to a culturally safe funding model for Indigenous organizations to implement HIV and substance misuse prevention programming. Slide 7, please. So I'll try and speak a little to Every Child Belongs and Early On. So Every Child Belongs is the service delivery model for children with extra support needs, so children with special gifts and their families in licensed childcare and home childcare. So each childcare program has access to a resource consultant staff from an Every Child Belongs service agency, and that person works with the childcare program and the family to develop strategies, carry out individual support plans for the child. The resource consultant staff also supports childcare programs to build inclusive environments through training and program consultation. And so Every Child Belongs specialized consultant services also play a role. They are also available, and this is on an as-needed basis. And that specialized consultation service area is available and includes access to an Indigenous resource consultant, or consultation, I should say. And that's delivered by staff with Indigenous lived experience who are able to provide a unique perspective of two-eyed seeing. And the service targets support to other resource consultation staff and frontline childcare staff to increase cultural understanding and awareness. A little bit about the Early On Child and Family Program. Children's Services provides funding. Many of you are aware for 5 Indigenous Early On centers. Those are for children ages newborn to 6, as well as their families. And these are located in various Indigenous hubs across the city. So 4 locations are operated by Native Child, and 1 is operated by Anegbi. Children's Services also funds 3 mobile Indigenous programs, including land-based programming operated by Ojibwakan. There's also a languages program operated by Native Canadian Centre and a fathering program operated by Native Child and Family Services. To give you a little bit of mental health related work on Children's Services. And last but not least, I just want to speak a little bit to shelter support and housing, and then share some of our thoughts on next steps. And that's the end of the presentation. So next slide, slide 8. So SSHA provides funding to Indigenous-led organizations to provide social housing, Indigenous shelter, street outreach, and housing support programs. While SSHA does not fund Indigenous programming specific to mental health or well-being, they do provide grants, so funding to Indigenous organizations to provide a broad range of housing support programs, such as community-based housing supports, housing help, supports for daily living, and drop-in services. In addition to housing-related supports, some of these programs may provide services under a broader, more holistic definition of mental health and community safety supports, including access to cultural supports, such as elders, traditional medicine, ceremony, and tea. SSHA administers an Indigenous-specific funding stream through the provincial Homes for Good program. Homes for Good creates new housing with support options through providing operating funding to Indigenous agencies to support rent subsidies as well as housing support services. In the 20% grants Indigenous funding stream, many of you were part of this. Back in October of 2019, SSHA and the Toronto Indigenous Community Advisory Board, or TCAB, and the Aboriginal Labour Force Development Circle, ALFDC, signed a memorandum of understanding to outline how they will work together on the development of an Indigenous funding stream with an allocation of 20% of grants funding as it becomes available over time. SSHA continues to work in collaboration with TCAB and ALFDC to develop this funding stream and are looking at a stage setup for implementation. SSHA also works with TCAB and the Coordinated Access Subcommittee of the TCAB on the development of coordinated access system that meets the needs of Indigenous clients and organizations, ideally in order to match Indigenous clients with the housing and supports that they need. A coordinated access to housing and support system is one that uses a consistent approach to access, prioritize, and connect people experiencing homelessness to the supports that they need. And then last but not least, there's also potential to explore opportunities for mental health supports and shelters with Indigenous partners. So in keeping with the commitments of meeting in the middle, SSHA would engage with TCAB to explore these opportunities together. And then the next step slide. I feel like there's a lot to do and that we're just starting from within the city to get together in that coordinated fashion. We know coordination is necessary at the city to do this in the best possible way. So the Indigenous Affairs Office will continue to bring city colleagues together. We can host community circles and workshops to ensure Indigenous voices are driving wherever we go with this work. One piece of this work that we think is needed going forward is to ensure we are closer in our understanding of mental health from Indigenous perspectives. So we'll look to you, the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, and Indigenous partners and community in this work going forward to help define. And in order to ultimately identify funds, we need to work with Indigenous organizations and leaders and community to identify what is needed. And with that, I'll say merci and Anaskamo for your time. And we do have some colleagues from TPH, SSHA, Children's Services, and of course, Anania and I are here to answer questions.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for that very thorough presentation, and also thank staff from various divisions who have taken the time out of their day to join us today to be able to provide answers to any of the questions that the committee may have. At this juncture, I'd just like to ask if any members of the committee have questions for the staff related to this presentation. Tracy.
I'm just wondering, I know this is probably happening behind the scenes, but I just wanted to have it on record. Has the Office of Aboriginal Affairs approached other community agencies that have Indigenous programming in them to get their input into the health and well-being needs and a lot of the topics that we touch on here as committee members? Just wanted to mention that because we know that we have, our Indigenous community organizations, but also some of our programming has also been in non-Indigenous organizations. So some of our community members deliver Indigenous programming there. Thank you.
Marcy, Tracy, I really appreciate what you just shared. And that's a really important next step, is continuing the conversations, expanding the conversations with Indigenous leaders, Indigenous organizations, Indigenous leaders within non-Indigenous organizations, as you so aptly mentioned, and of course, community, hearing directly from community as well. So if there's any specific individuals or groups that you think, or organizations that you think we should talk with, sit with, then please let us know, and we're happy to do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Tracy. Any additional speakers on this item? I can't seem to see you all, so if I don't see you and your hand is up, please take the initiative to unmute yourself. No further questions? You're all strikingly silent on this presentation. Well, I'll take that as a sign that this was very thorough and our questions were answered and the good work that went into producing something so comprehensive. So if there are no further speakers on the item, we do need a motion on the floor to receive it. Councillor Layton and Larry, thank you very much. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to the, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm getting a cookie delivery in my office. Thank you kindly. That brings us to the next item on our agenda. It's very festive around here at Native Child this time of year. Thank you very much. So that brings us to item AA 8.6, which is the Indigenous Affairs update. We have Selena Young, the Director of the Indigenous Affairs Office, to provide an update to the committee. Welcome, Selena.
Merci, although admittedly I'm a bit of a cookie monster, so now I'm distracted, but that's okay. Thanks so much for creating space in these meetings for the Indigenous Affairs Office to share some words. I thought, given that this was the last meeting of 2020, that the team, we had a little bit of a reflection looking back on some of the successes over the past year. And so I thought we would share some of that with you. But of course, I need to start by saying 2020 has been a very difficult year for Indigenous communities in Toronto. The impact of COVID-19 on Indigenous communities has been severe and unrelenting, and it further illuminates the grave inequities experienced by Indigenous people living in the city. The Indigenous Affairs Office has tried to do a small part to work efficiently and diligently to connect Indigenous organizations and communities with the resources needed to respond to this crisis. At the onset of COVID-19, the office worked closely with SDFA, Social Development Finance Administration, and tasked the Toronto Aboriginal Support Services Council to secure immediate funds for the continuation of vital support services. This work has continued, ensuring additional funds are secured for Indigenous organizations who are at the front lines meeting critical needs for communities. We've advocated for the provision of grant funding to NEGB for youth violence prevention services, supporting SDFA to decolonize its approach to granting for a more equitable outcome. We're supporting the Indigenous component of the city's mental health support strategy that you heard about. That's a strong partnership with Native Child and Family Services. We've also supported Indigenous land-based programming in city parks and green spaces. So that includes Native Child's Trauma-Informed on the Land program, as well as Aboriginal Legal Services Family Dispute Resolution Circle. And we continue to try to leverage donations to be distributed to Indigenous-led and Indigenous-serving organizations and agencies. Some additional accomplishments. We continued efforts to try to build meaningful relationships with Indigenous organizations and communities in this virtual world. The IAO has been helping Indigenous community to navigate the city and build connections with city divisions. And a couple of those examples, we've been working closely with building, municipal licensing and standards, parks, forestry and rec, and fire services to secure access to land for land-based healing and cultural revival along the Humber and in Taylor Creek Park. We're also working with housing and planning staff to support Thunder Woman Healing Lodge. We worked with multiple divisions for the Data for Equity strategy, which includes a strong focus on Indigenous data governance that will facilitate the city's ability to collect, analyze, report, and act on data in support of Indigenous communities' needs. The IAO welcomed a new Indigenous placemaking consultant and saw the development of an interim Indigenous placemaking advisory circle to ensure community voices are front and center in the work that we do. We also completed our first year with an extraordinary Indigenous Youth Research Associate joining our team. And we're very excited to be leading a cross-divisional expansion, onboarding upwards of 6 additional Indigenous Youth Research Associates in 2020. And I will finish by sharing on behalf of the team our gratitude to each member and the collective wisdom and strength of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. We wish you all the best for a restful and rejuvenating holiday and solstice, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in 2020. Merci. Nanaskamo.
Thank you for that update. At this time, I'd like to ask if any members of the committee have questions or comments for Selena. Andrea. Sorry, Andrea, did you have a comment?
Oh, yes, I did. I didn't hear my name. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
I put my camera off because I was going outside to see our lineup. And so what I'm calling upon those individuals who are here is that while it's that season, and we're talking about the mental health, there's a number of our community members who are out there, and also, for those who may be closing, I'm trying to figure out how many of our services that are offering counseling or any kind of elder supports, because I think that's really critical. Trying to create some normality, and yes, we can give, but having access for persons to have interaction with, and if it happens to be on the land, and if there's the ability of providing some counseling within a TP, but I think that we need to also think about those people who are not our community, who are not going to have homes. And I just got a text here telling me that of a frostbite, and that wanting some assistance with a young mother. So the mental health is really critical for us to, if we can start coordinating, and if you could start providing the, who you have on board, that'd be great over the next couple of weeks while some of our operations may be closed. I'd really appreciate that.
Thank you, Andrea.
This is Crystal on behalf of AMPABA. Could I speak to that as well, please?
Yes, please do, Crystal.
Thank you. We're noticing at AMPABA, obviously living in the digital world has caused a lot of mental health issues for our members. Our members experience a lot of mental health issues, being isolated in their homes. And, as vaccines become more available to people, we're going to be in a state of transition back to community building. AMPABA right now is doing online community building, and we are experiencing an overwhelming amount of mental health issues just from the experience of bringing people online. So I would like to see maybe some efforts focused on transitioning people back to community as the vaccines become available and things start to open up again. I think that it's a very vital thing that we bring forth to the committee, because COVID isn't just happening to our agencies, it's happening, mental health is probably one of the biggest things. We've made people isolate themselves and disconnecting them from community members and people who are vital to their healing journeys. And so, when we talk about the connection of land and we talk about the connection to mental health services, I agree with Andrea, bringing together cultural supports in a culture-based trauma-informed way is something that we need to definitely address as a committee. And just speaking from our experience from AMPABA and the online community, we're experiencing that mental health effect from COVID. So maybe if that could be taken into consideration at this time. Thank you.
I want to thank you for that, Crystal, because I do think that all of our organizations are seeing mental health challenges acutely increase in the community. And I think it's something that is really important for us to keep our focus on and collectively work towards together. So miigwech for that. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Selena at this time from the committee? Okay. Hearing no further speakers, then I'd like, can we please have a motion to receive the item? Brian and Larry, thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? My God. Okay, seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so that takes us to an important motion around members of the committee who have not been able to join us today. So members, I'd like to move a motion to excuse the absence of members who are not in attendance for today's meetings. And if clerks could just display that. Oh, you guys are fast today, miigwech. That the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee excuse the absence of Shadrach Gobert, Millie Knapp, Nancy Martin, Blanche Miowasagi, and Tanya Senk from the December 15th, 2020 Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. Thank you. Could I please, Tracy, thank you. Thank you for moving that. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, the motion carries. We've all done very good work this morning. I want to thank everyone for their participation and engagement, all the committee members and also the staff that have taken time out of their day to join us and get through the hurdles of technology. That concludes our business today. Thank you to all the members and staff and presenters. I wish you all health and wellness over the holiday season. Miigwech to all of you. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Should Larry close the meeting? Larry?
Yeah.
Larry, do you want to close the meeting?
Oh. Sorry, we're still here?
You are still with us, yes. Thank goodness.
Okay.
Yes.
Karina, we thank you for bringing us together today, and we ask you to guide us in a positive way in our journeys and keep us focused for the purpose and for the vision for our people who need help. And we ask you to guide us this Christmas season, that our people that are on the street, keep them safe as possible. With that, I say miigwech. Thank you. Stay well, everyone.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry. All the best for the season to everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.